put something out there for the
Exactly.
homeless population.
Yeah.
And it's never enough. You're never going to give them enough. And look at the situation now. We expanded $13 million. We expanded for the rescue mission down there, right?
Yeah.
And we now have a total of something over 500 and some beds. And even in the cold weather this year, we still had some beds empty because a lot of they won't go.
There's a subset that will not go in.
Yeah. So, you know, but my big thing is there has to be consequences for it. You can't just say, oh, I didn't see you were homeless, so you can rob me.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going in.
No.
I didn't see your home, so you can come and spot me.
Yeah, you can take a crap on my front door, or whatever it is.
Something like that.
And that's what they all do. That's what they do. I mean, there's businesses that I saw the report of Portland, and they're moving out. Businesses that we've had.
And that's what
We're going back to this other because, you know.
Hi.
How are you, sir?
Good.
Jim Moore.
Andy Gunning. Nice to meet you, Jim.
Yes, I thought I recognized you, but it's been
Okay.
a while.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good.
Jim Nellinger.
Oh,
Tim,
good.
O'Donnell.
Okay. Good deal. It's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
All right, yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay.
How's it going?
Not bad. I'm
Just thought I'd
getting,
drop in and see what's
I've
going
got
on.
April 1st is retirement.
Oh, my
Well,
God.
partial retirement.
Oh, I know. I've been partially retired, and I just went back to work again.
Yeah, I'm going down to 2 jobs instead of 3, so hopefully that'll be more like retirement.
What kind of work do you do, Tim?
I manage buildings. I'm an operations manager for one of the bigger churches in town. And I manage 3 buildings downtown.
What's the market like back there?
So, and then I have my own property that I manage too. So,
Fun.
yeah, fun. It was a good retirement plan anyway.
Well, it is. In
Yeah.
fact, I've got
Down here, she was out last week.
Yep.
we moved out
really?
8 months ago, and I'm ready to.
Yeah.
I was going to do Airbnb, but I think it's just too
A lot of
big.
places won't let you do Airbnb.
I can where I am.
What?
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
It's
already done all of them.
it's pretty risky, I think, to do the
That's not what I've
Airbnb
heard.
stuff.
Friends of mine have done it.
Yeah, and I could
Successful at it.
point you to some people that can tell you horror stories.
Well, hopefully, Senate Bill, what is it, 1815, is going to get passed soon to at least protect landlords from crazy squatters.
Oh, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of.
Most arcane thing I've ever.
I know. I break into your house, and because you're not there, and you can't get rid of me.
Okay.
I think that comes from when people used to homestead a piece of land with 80 years
Yeah, I don't
ago.
know. Yeah, something. I don't know. But that's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
So I'm going, what's the holdup? Why is that even? It doesn't have a, well, I don't think it'll have much of a fiscal amount.
I mean, who's fighting it politically? But
How are
it
you?
didn't-
Right?
It didn't pass once.
How are
Well,
you?
There are the people who, well, it's a process, but there's also the groups that want to support the poor people that are homeless or whatever. They say, well, you know, they got no other place to go, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but yeah.
Is owned by somebody else.
Yeah, I know. It's like your property. So, who knows?
See? We can afford this here.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, I had,
This is our new executive director. Yeah, Michelle. Nice to meet
tell you,
you.
I'll make a remark. This property got built. It's not bad.
You're in serious hire.
And
Always.
I had a property in town up for rent.
Nobody's happy.
And it took me
Oh, I bet you do. Excited. Good.
the only criteria are I won't allow
You want to sit on the other side.
Thanks for you. I thought there was someone over there. That's why I did first. So work on my tan.
no fellas.
Hi,
Nothing.
Michelle. How's it
I
going?
couldn't find it.
I'm telling her to move over to the other side.
Yeah, I'm gonna be
I
on the
wasn't
other
doing it.
side.
I had a
So go ahead
professional
and sit
trying
down
to
there.
fix the property.
Oh, it's one-sided. Oh, yours is one-sided.
Stuff
So that means like one of you can hit me from the right, one of you can hit me from the left.
Yeah. We already had that coordinated.
Thank you, Andy.
They don't let us print it.
Thank you for
Don't tell me you can't manage to,
I think I only did that once.
and you know one thing you never see questions because they know they'll come look that up. Yeah.
My daughter, I was thinking about it. I don't have my glasses.
I noticed that about you. You see? No, you're fine. I did read it before. I can take I'm getting a more reasonable hour, but that's because I go home on this lunch with or dinner with them. I know I go back to work. I don't physically go. I just go back home. Yeah. Okay. It's what's in CPA? We are getting, and we they're like dropping like flies. People can see.
Not a lot of them.
We'll anchor this into the table. What do you say? I'm doing okay.
It's like taking forever for people to recover. All right, I think we need to get this started.
There's one error.
That definitely looks like it. Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started, please.
Totally irrelevant.
All right. Thank you all. It's nice to see such a full room. And I think we have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. Do I have a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Any?
Real quick, I'm going to interrupt. We have a brand new Bethany. Her name is Jessica. And because she's still learning us, we do need everybody to use their names when they make motions, please.
Jim Moore moved to approve consent agenda.
Sharon Brown, second.
The blue lights are on. Oh, that's all right.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
And we need to put introductions too.
I have my own microphone.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion carried. Let's do introductions, since I was just informed I forgot that part. I'm Michelle Day, at large.
Sharon Brown, City of Fountain.
I'm Jessica McMullen, your PPACG staff member.
At large.
Terry Hayes, Town of Monument.
Tom Fifely, City of Colorado Springs.
John DeVoe, Woodland Park.
Ellen Hussey, Teller County.
Tamara Dippner, City of Colorado Springs.
Julie Ott, League of Women Voters.
Kim Mutchler, at large.
Rachel Beck, the Colorado Springs Chamber and EDC.
Kevin Walker, at large.
Roy Rosenthal, Manitou Springs.
Jen Nellinger, El Paso County.
Tim O'Donnell, Kono.
And Jim Moore at large.
All right, and then over there at the back table, please, Jennifer.
Jennifer Valentine, PPACG staff. And Jessica Bechtel, PPACG.
Thanks. And then the audience, please.
Andy Gunning, PPACG.
Ken Prather, PPACG.
Anton Ramage, El Paso County. I'm a member of TAC.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, I'd like to, at this point, call up Andy Gunning, our new PPACG chairperson. Or
Thank you.
Executive Director, sorry.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. Really happy to be able to join the agency and all the committees that are doing really good work here. Just started last week. I'm second week on the job now. Came here, just for those that don't know, from Maryland. I was back in Rockville, Maryland for about the past 7 years doing more local planning, city planning, where I was planning director and the deputy planning director before that. But before Maryland, I was in Arizona at the Tucson Regional Planning Agency, the Pima Association of Governments, for about 12 years doing regional planning, regional transportation work, regional environmental work, and all the good stuff that COGS, MPOs, and transportation authorities work on. So I'm super excited to be back at that level and doing this kind of work again. It feels this is my home. This is what I should be doing. So just really, really excited. Everybody's been super welcoming since I got here, and look forward to working with everybody. Any questions, any suggestions, or anything you want to highlight? Or
Good luck.
yeah. Okay, well, good deal. Well, thanks a bunch. I'll be around, and you can reach me anytime, and look forward to working with you. Okay, thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Andy, appreciate it. Are there any other public comments? All right, hearing none, we will move right along into action items. Ken, tip amendment number 16.
Good afternoon, Ken Prather, Acting Transportation Director here at PPACG. Last month we had a discussion on tip amendment 16. We had gotten the request from CDOT, if you remember, just a couple of days before a few days before our meeting. So we had a discussion. The board did release the tip amendment for public comment until its next board meeting in March, where it proposes to take action. The amendment is to add the I-25 gap project, which is widen lanes northbound and southbound from Monument to, in our tip, to County Line Road for approximately $50 million. The full project is a $350 million project. Goes another 16 miles north in Douglas County up towards Castle Rock. That portion of the project will be added to the DRCOG, the Denver Council of Governments TIP, or Transportation Improvement Program. So for federal purposes, we have to have the entire project in a long-range plan and in a Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, the funding document. And since our boundaries between DRCOG and PPACG is the county line, we'll have 2 miles of the project in our TIP, 16 miles of the project in DRCOG's TIP. So they're going through a similar process for their portion at this time. We've received 2 comments directly, both in favor of the project, that it's needed. CDOT has held, since the last week in January through last week, held 8 listening sessions around the community. Got about 165 comments. All say that the project is needed. Some say it should be 1 lane. Some say it should be 2 lanes in each direction. Some say it should be tolled. Some say it should not be tolled. All of those options, none of those options are precluded by the wording in our TIP. Our TIP project says widen lanes, doesn't say what kind, doesn't say how many. And to remember, this is a balancing act between CDOT not yet knowing for sure what the project is, and FHWA's sense of urgency to get the project into the TIP with as adequate a description as possible. But they are still looking at finishing the environmental assessment in May and are trying to have all federal action finished before that, so there is no delay in starting construction. In addition to CDOT's listening sessions, we have had press release out for our TIP amendment, as well as the draft TIP, which will also include the I-25 project. There has been articles in the Independent, the Tri-Lakes, the Pikes Peak Courier. The El Paso County the county commissioners held a public meeting last Saturday morning up at Lewis Palmer High School. I counted at the beginning of the meeting, there were 50 people that I did not recognize as staff, elected officials, PPACG personnel, and news personnel. The commissioners taped that meeting and put it on their website, and I saw there were 2 news channels there, and I saw a video of one of those. So it is well known, and also back in November there was the ballot issues to provide funding that was supported in El Paso County. So what we're asking for today is a recommendation to the board of whether the I-25 gap project, TIP Amendment 16, should be approved or not.
Is there any discussion, any motions? Aubrey?
Thanks, Ken. You mentioned there were 2 comments on,
There were 2 comments that were directly emailed to us.
okay. Any comment about the language of
No.
the recommendation? Okay.
All of the comments, were what it should be or shouldn't be, but nobody, I don't think anybody has received a comment that the road should not be widened.
Jen?
Did you hear, when you were in on the listening sessions and in on at Palmer High School, in on the session at Palmer High School, did you notice any skew like 60-40, 50-50 about toll versus no toll in the discussion?
At the
And I realize this is anecdotal.
at the Lewis Palmer meeting, it was more like 95-5 against tolling. One of the attendees stood up and said, "How many people support tolling?" I think there was 4 hands that went up.
That's just good to know from sitting here.
Yeah. Now, this is a CDOT project, and they were there. Michael Lewis, the executive director of CDOT, was there. John Hall, the project manager for the I-25 gap. They were there. They participated in the questions and answer. Michael Lewis made a presentation, tried to put it into the statewide perspective, and so they are taking comment. That is, they're required to take comment. I got the impression some of the people thought that it was a Democratic vote, and enough people voted against it that was going to kill tolls. But Mr. Lewis did show that the other roads that are being widened currently and have just finished being widened in the state the lanes are being tolled. It's not the whole road, because current law says you can't toll existing interstates, but you can toll new capacity, new lanes that you add, but you can't go back and toll existing lanes. That's current law, and Rocky Scott, the commissioner, just sent out an article that he captures all these articles. I think it's Indiana, a state anyway, is proposing language to allow tolling on all roads in their state. So this could be something that could change in the future, but as of today, we cannot toll those 2 lanes that exist already on I-25.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think everybody supports the widening of the road, and I support the TIP amendment to get that done. My question is, when and who makes the decision about the tolling?
CDOT makes the decision, and I'm expecting that they will make it in May. That'll be the
In May.
conclusion of their environmental assessment, and that'll be the decision. Then they're looking at construction or parts of construction being able to start maybe in August, but certainly by November.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm in support also of the TIP amendment, but I have a question around the significance of the 25 million and the 25 million. So it's 25 million of local dollars, 50% of the total cost. That's, pretty steep relative to what we usually spend and get matched and all those kinds of things. So are we spending the entire 25 million? Are we subsidizing the construction of the project north of the county line? What's the significance of having the 25 million and the 25 million involved in that?
The 50 million is an estimate of the cost or the potential cost in our area. Dr. Cog is putting 300 million in their TIP for the Douglas County portion. Once the project is clearly identified and scoped and described, the exact cost estimate will be developed, and our TIP will be amended to reflect the correct cost. Ours is only covering the 2 miles in our area. Since El Paso County had put in 25 million, just for the ease, this was all developed over a telephone conversation with 2 CDOT regions, FHWA and El Paso County and us, said put the 25 million that El Paso County is donating to the project in El Paso County, match it with the 25 million. For all of your other TIP projects that you've ever dealt with here, normally we think of 80% federal, 20% local match. This whole project is going to be 20% federal, 80% state and local. And that is the way it seems to be going at the federal level under the new infrastructure plan. Heavy emphasis on locals and states paying the bulk of the cost.
Right. So when you say DRCOG is putting in the money, where are they getting the money?
Douglas County is putting in $10 or $15 million. The state is putting in the bulk or the rest of 65 million is coming from an infra grant, a federal grant. If we get it, we don't know if we're going to have it yet. We're putting in 25 million, Douglas County 10 million. I haven't heard that DRCOG is putting in any money. PPACG is not putting in any money. Douglas County or El Paso County is putting in money.
Jim?
You may recall in the November election, and that was part of something, Tamara, you brought this to light, I think last month, that when we voted in November on a couple of issues to sort of put IOUs out there and to say that PPRTA could put X amount percentage against this project, and I think the county, we had a similar initiative to vote on. That was all before the whole idea of a tolling lane, what really became into the public view, that was all part of this, trying to bring a pot together of money. And we're just, as Ken said, I think we're just looking at that 2-mile stretch. I wanted to add that as I noted in the report from the board meeting, CDOT did an extensive presentation on this and got a lot of feedback from primarily county people talking about the opposition to managed lanes. That's the terminology that's being used in the bureaucracy, and how that's going to actually be handled. And there were several voices very strongly in support of requiring 4 lanes because 3 lanes probably is what we needed in about 1995. So this is still to be sorted out. There's a lot of work that still is to be done.
Tamara?
So we had the HPTE gentleman come and speak to us last year, the High Performance Transportation Enterprise, if I'm saying that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Did this project in any way score high enough to be a project through HPTE as a funding source, or is that not an option any longer?
I have not heard them mentioned at all in connected to this project in any way. I know there's a bridge enterprise, but that would not be connected to the widening. They might be able, if by chance one of the bridges was eligible for that funding and it had to be worked on to be widened or something, that might be eligible. But I haven't heard. All of the state money is coming from Senate Bill 267 that the legislature approved this spring.
Okay. And then just
Last
another
spring.
follow-up question. I think last month I asked, this would be a CDOT-owned roadway and not like E470 where it's managed by a private entity. Is that
This is a state road, CDOT road.
okay.
Noting that this, I think, is a trailing action from our discussion, extensive discussion in January, I move that we forward the proposed TIP amendment number 16 to the board and recommend approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Jim making the motion and
Yes, I'm
Tamara
sorry.
doing the,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Jessica is clearing me for Jessica.
all right, and Ken gets to stay another moment or two.
2045 plan scoring criteria. We've been talking about this for a number of months. I've invited Jennifer to come up here and help me take notes. I find it hard to see the screen and to listen and talk and write all at the same time. Some of them are getting hard to do no matter what I'm doing.
I have some gum out in the car if you'd like to.
So, in your packet was in your original packet was a straw. Staff developed scoring criteria after talking with you several months ago, talking with TAC, got some initial input, and we went through and developed some draft scoring criteria based on this document that you remember here, the big 11 by 17 landscape document. There were, what did I say in the memo? 5 goals, 18 objectives, and 18 targets. And you remember a couple of our targets we didn't have the data for. Some of them we recognized that you wouldn't be able to measure them until some time had elapsed. So for those type of targets, it's very hard to develop a specific scoring criteria when we don't have the data. So in the past, we had 13 goals. Each goal had an objective, a target, and a scoring criteria related to it. So if it was a straight one-for-one relationship per goal, 13 goals, 13 scoring criteria. This time we only have 5 goals, and in trying to achieve what staff has wanted in the past, as well as at least the Transportation Advisory Committee, if not this committee as well, is to reduce the number of scoring criteria. We wound up, I think it's with the 9 criteria that was in your packet. TAC did not finish developing their recommendation at their normal TAC meeting, so they held an additional meeting last Thursday after your packet went out. And the recommendation that they developed was emailed out to you, and I think we have it on here. We can pull it up. But it's the second email that you got, and it had the goals with all the red font in it. The red font is where TAC developed a recommendation different than what was in your original TAC packet emailing. Several of their comments, or most of the changes that they developed, looking for consistency within the goals. So, for instance, under maintenance, well, I don't know if maintenance is a good one, but there are several that we did not have negative scores for some modes of travel, such as bike, but we did have it for cars or something. So, the worst a bike could get would be 0. Worst a car could get could be -9. That wasn't fair across the modes. So to be more consistent, we revised that. In some cases, such as maintenance, you can't have a negative score. I mean, if a road is perfectly good, it's 100%. If it's not perfectly good, it might be a 0 rating under the different scales that they have, but nobody has a negative roughness index or negative sufficiency rating. So not every criteria you wound up having negative, but there was work to develop consistency, and in some cases where it didn't make sense to have, I think, Brian, we'll get to it. I think it was the change in accessibility or mobility because of negative ridership in transit or negative ridership for bicycle. It made sense under roads, but it doesn't make sense under the other 2 modes of categories for the targets that we had. So rather than coming up with mathematically a negative score that was unreasonable, we got rid of the negative score under the roads and had consistency across all three modes. So not every criteria has negatives, but at least within one parameter, one goal, all of the projects are treated the same. So that was part of the discussion that we went through at the special meeting and came up with these changes. And maybe it's best if I just scroll down through these. So under mobility, the first two did not have negatives. Well, they did. It doesn't make sense to imagine somebody submitting a project that would decrease transit ridership. So this is where we said, okay, rather than going negative, the worst project will be a 0, best project will be a 9. And then we changed the auto and freight to reflect the consistency in scoring. So, and if you remember, for those who were here 4 years ago when we did this for the 2040 plan, we did not have negative scores. The worst score or the non-applicable score both got a 0. We were trying to improve that this time so that projects that actually did do something bad, it could be reflected rather than being treated as not applicable. So I guess if you've got questions as we're going through this.
Could you help me understand what the auto and freight, I can figure out vehicle hours of travel.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what PM means, but
PM,
I'm not sure how those break out and whether that's for a specific period of time or what.
PM is your evening, 5 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
PM peak hour. And so you can do something on one road that helps that road.
Okay.
But it might draw traffic from other roads. It might push traffic to other roads. So rather than saying what you do on one road is the only thing we're evaluating the regional impact. So it's the change in hours on a regional basis, not just on the quarter mile or half mile or something of that road. And this is consistent with what we've used in the past.
Okay.
Kevin?
Somebody have a question?
Yeah.
When you change these things where there's no negative, does that mean that there's not going to be a project that increases increases the impact anywhere? I mean,
They're
thinking about this. For example, if someone asked to take a hot project, the Research Parkway capacity project, some of the city were to ask for money to reduce the lanes on Research Parkway.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that increase vehicle hours traveled?
It could.
And so why then are we now saying that you don't get a negative for that?
Because we wanted to be consistent with the transit and the non-motorized modes of traffic, that nobody could come up with an example of how those would be a viable project that would decrease transit ridership or decrease pedestrian and bicycle usage.
But we're not consistent. There are others of these, unless you changed all of them.
That's why I say
They're different. There are some that are negative or they're different. Where there's some
right, but
negative
we wanted
lines
to
and
be
some negative-
we wanted to be consistent within this goal, connectivity and accessibility. Or I'm sorry, mobility. So we're consistent by not having negative scores under mobility.
But Ken, Kevin's point is well taken, and specifically the example he cited where they took Research Parkway from 3 vehicle lanes of travel down to 2 to add a bike lane. It was positive for the bike lanes and the bike ridership, but it was a negative to the vehicle hours travel. I think we need to take a look at, that could be a potential where you've got a positive impact in one aspect of the plan, but you're negatively impacting some other area.
Well,
I mean, I think, Kevin,
you're-
that's what you're kind of, or
You-
in
you-
general,
I
the
don't-
fact
I
that
don't know
you
what the
could
point
have a
of not-
project that could negatively impact something.
You're right. And in this case, we did not want to favor transit and bicycles over cars by giving cars negative scores, but not allowing negative scores for bicycles and
But I actually
transit.
the question would hold for anything. I mean, there could be a proposal
Right.
to reduce transit, and that we would take money to do something, I don't know, I can't think of it, but where we are reducing ridership.
I think we need to step back.
It just seems to me like we ought to just keep it in there.
Well, I think we need to go back to the goals, because what it sounds like the calculations and the scoring they're doing is directly based on the goals and the objective of the goal. So if we go to mobility, for example, any project being scored based on our goals, objective, if it reduces peak vehicle travel hours or whatever that's called, if it reduces it, then you get a higher score, which allows that project to get a higher score, which means has a better chance of getting funded. So if we start looking at saying, well, what if it increases the auto and freight? Well, that's not part of our goal. Our goal is to reduce it. So, I mean,
No, it's okay.
I'm curious,
Making it worse.
your spreadsheet or whatever system you guys are going to use for scoring all this, I'm really impressed that you guys can put all this through it. But I think we can't get off the track, and we need to stay on track that let's stay focused on the goals, and the scoring system is a direct result of how we want to score these projects based on the goals that we have set. So I do understand, because you might have a situation where you do increase transit, but that's not what they're trying to measure these projects against. They're trying to measure it against what the goals we set, and our goal is we want to reduce auto and freight. And so if you can reduce it, you score higher. Should you get penalized because your project may or increase the freight? I don't know. That's really hard to determine, but you have to set some kind of parameters on your scoring system, or we're going to be chasing our tails, basically.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I thought that was the whole point, that if you are having a negative impact on the goal, you get a negative score. That was the whole idea of having negatives. So if we follow that logic, we would have no negatives anywhere, which is where we were before.
Right, so, and I think that's what Ken's trying to say, is some things, it's more clear-cut how negative scoring can be a attribute to the scoring system that would benefit it. Some things are difficult to measure that. And I think that's the parameters they're trying to set. And, I mean, not that it's perfect, but I think it's a really good starting point. And I think we need to just try and stay in focus. Basically, the transit objective is to maintain or improve current fixed route vehicle infrastructure condition. Am I on the right one, Ken? I think because I do understand what you're saying, but I think we need to take each item as the staff here has taken it, and saying, okay, with transit and non-motorized, negative scoring doesn't benefit the scoring system, doesn't make it so that it's an equal weighted for everything. I'm having a hard time expressing myself, but I think, Ken, maybe you can help me to first how you guys are going to calculate this and how the negative scoring would impact the transit and non-motorized.
Well, several of these are only going to be, there's only going to be one score. If a project is a transit project, it gets scored under the transit mode. If it's a bike project, pedestrian project, it would get scored underneath that. If it's an auto project, it would be scored under that. It wouldn't be scored, or it would get 0 scores for the other two modes that are not applicable to that type of a project.
Tim?
So a maintenance would there were three things, bridge, road, and transit. You're only going to get one score because you're a road project. You're only going to get one score because you're a bridge project. So it's that kind of a concept. We've got multiple modes. We're trying not to bias the system in favor of one mode or another. And that's the problem. If you give negatives to one mode but not the two others, then one is hurt more.
Right, then your project, the goal you're shooting for that roadway project, you will reduce the overall score. If you,
Right.
let's say, you get a negative score for the non-motorized.
But the issue that Kevin brings up, we discussed extensively that
Discussed extensively and then changed it.
Well, staff is still waiting for your recommendation. TAC made their recommendation, and that's what was emailed out to you. You can make a separate recommendation, and then staff has to decide which one to go or how to go in the middle or whatever, or we give the board three different recommendations, and they really love that.
Go ahead, Tim.
I guess I'm kind of with Kevin on this. None of these projects exist in a vacuum. It's just like the research one. If you only looked at it as a bike thing, they'd score really high as a bike thing. And then everybody else gets mad because you reduced it, a main thoroughfare, from 3 to 2 lanes. So I don't know how you can just score a project in its little stovepipe, because that makes no sense to me. None of these are stovepipe. They all affect somebody somewhere. If you put even a transit system in at some kind, you increase traffic, it may impact auto and freight somewhere else. I mean, I don't know. That to me, I don't get. I don't get how you can just say, well, it's only a bike. We only look at bike. We score it for a bike, and then everybody on Research Parkway starts screaming at the mayor. So, just saying.
Go ahead, Jim.
Actually, this is the question that I had written on the score sheet, particularly coming from the TAC, and I appreciated you leading with the rationale for why you wanted to do it that way. But I think I'm really kind of siding with Kevin, and to Tamara's point, and it's a valid one, I believe. Yes, we're supposed to be supporting the goals, but if it doesn't support the goal and adversely affects the goal, the worst it can get is a 0. I'm not sure I understand that completely. My leaning right now is to support the staff recommendation across the board, because this is meant to be a tool for the staff. Now, where I've got to work this out is my full understanding is the TAC essentially represents many of the organizations that are going to submit the projects. So they're concerned about how it's going to get scored, whether it's going to get scored fairly, and I think those are good concerns. But from a kind of a macro perspective that we're being asked to give, I'm really inclined to lean toward the pros that have to do the scoring and say, is this the way you want to use that, the tool that you want to use? I'm going to have to trust you on that.
Aubrey?
If I'm understanding this correctly, a negative score would only be applicable if you're scoring across modes, right? Because somebody's going to present a bike project, for instance, it would only score positively. It may score negatively against auto and freight, but you're not looking at that the way you've described it. So I think I'm in agreement with Kevin, but only if we're scoring across modes and not.
Jennifer?
So, first a piece of context. So there was a real emphasis at the TAC meeting, and even when staff internally was, coming up with these scoring criteria, to try to present as neutral of a platform as possible, because if you look a little further down on your agenda, something we'll be talking about later today is the weighting. So that's really the opportunity to say, in our region, this is kind of the priority. There's a real need for non-motorized projects or for, just certain types of projects. So a lot of our conversation was focused on being consistent under each goal, not favoring one mode over another. But one thing that didn't really come up is this issue that's coming up right now. And so for something like maintenance, it makes a lot of sense. You're either a bridge or you're a bus, right? You're not ever going to be both. But under mobility, you could potentially say, this is a road project that negatively impacts non-motorized. So you're going to get points for reducing PM peak VHT, but you're going to lose points for negatively impacting non-motorized mode share. That's not the direction that TAC took, and that's reflected here, but it's certainly another way to do it.
Thank you. So could we make that recommendation?
Sure.
That within this goal, for instance, that we include negative scoring and that it's looked at across modes, that projects are looked at across modes for this particular goal?
And so just to be clear, I need to know the will of the group before I start typing.
Thanks.
So all right. Does anybody have a motion that they can kind of formulate into a cohesive language?
But we're not making motion by goal, are we?
No, not by goal.
Okay.
Well, but I
So
mean,
do
we've
we-
got to make a motion on the entire.
So are we still going through the
Can we
rest
go-
of them first?
Can we go through the rest
Oh,
of them
that's
now?
true. We haven't finished yet. Sorry.
But if you
just-
all agree on this, you could say, go back to the way it was, or I could just put in add negatives or something if that's the consensus.
Is there someone from the TAC that can help us explain why? So my understanding is the red is the TAC's recommendation?
Correct.
Okay. Is there someone that can help us understand why TAC can provide an alternative option versus what staff provided with these changes? Anyone?
Yeah.
Ryan? Tim?
And then, hang on, Tamir, while he's coming up. John?
I've got probably a ignorant question, but I'll try it anyway. I had a chance to drive down Weber a couple times in the last week, and I'm saying, where'd the lanes go? I see one lane for a car. I see cars that look like they're parked out in the middle of the street, but I see the bike lanes protected on the side. Now, that's not true all over town. Now, when you do that, it's kind of obvious that less cars can go down there. So what's the purpose of all this? Just to provide paths for bicycles? I didn't know we had a bicycle crowding problem. So what are we doing? What's the purpose for this? Is this a bicycle lobbyist trying to get more bicycle paths, or are we all supposed to get healthier and ride a bike downtown? What is the purpose for this? Anybody?
I'm not touching that question.
I thought it was so that there was protected bike lanes by moving the parked cars between the driving cars and the bicyclists.
But the end result is less lanes for cars to drive on if it gets congested.
Well, you would have still had cars parked and a bike lane. They just moved them, so there was some confusion initially, but
Still
now I
is.
think people have figured it out.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what you're trying to prove by the
Still
score.
very
That's all.
confusing.
I saw a statistic the other day that there's 0.5% of the people ride their bikes to work or basically anywhere that's off trails, on the streets. So I'm kind of back to this whole thing of, nothing is done in a stovepipe.
But what's taking place is far more than 0.5% that affects the vehicle traffic.
Yeah, it's 0.5%.
Why is that?
People actually ride.
I know, you don't want to answer it, that's
And
okay.
unfortunately, John, I don't think we can answer that in this
Okay.
forum, but
Kinda
I
asked.
understand your concern.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Okay. Good afternoon. Brian Vituli, City of Colorado Springs Mountain Metro Transit, and Chair of the TAC. Also have Anton Ramage and Tim Roberts from the county and the city, respectively, so they can back me up or double-check what I'm saying.
Or leave.
And not that I can provide any more clarification for what we do, but, we called a special meeting just because, this is an ongoing process. It's a very difficult process in the long-range transportation plan process. And it's never perfect, but it's our interpretation of how we like to see the scoring criteria set up. Ken said it best, at least for goal one. Our goal was consistency among the criteria, to not have one mode having negatives and the other not having negatives. And, we also, I believe, revised the ranges of the sufficiency ratings for the bridges. So that was another step that we took there. As far as mobility, transit had two criteria. One was headways, and the other one was ridership. Some of us felt that was, putting too much of an emphasis on transit, so we all agreed to remove one of those so that each of the modes have a criteria to represent mobility. And the same goes for, we're pretty good for connectivity and accessibility. I'm sorry, that's where we had two transit criteria. Safety, I believe we agreed fully with staff's recommendation. And connectivity and accessibility, we agreed with staff's recommendation, except for removing one of the transit criteria. And economic vitality, particularly the environmental part, that's something that we've struggled with for many planning cycles. How do you measure, impacts to critical habitat and stormwater? It's a very difficult thing to measure and to measure the impact. But, for most of, further on in this item here, in attachment 2, there was consistency between the TAC and PPACG staff. Mm-hmm. So other than the red that you see in the early part of attachment 2.
Are there any other questions for Brian? Oh, Aubrey.
So regarding the dropping the transit headways as a scoring criteria, the population served within a quarter mile, the only way to achieve that is to add routes, correct? Am I not thinking of this right?
Increased density.
Within that
That's
service
not a
area.
transportation project, right? Mm-hmm. Within that service area. Is there much likelihood of that, or should we be actually looking at headways instead of population served?
Well, we opted to get rid of headways because transit does not really seek any operating funds through PPACG's transportation funding programs. We get other funding sources for operations. So we didn't feel it was an appropriate measure or criterion to have in there, since we're not going to be improving headways with funds that we get through PPACG. So we thought the other one was a better one to keep in.
Would there ever be a case where you could potentially improve headways through PPACG?
Not with the current funding sources.
Okay.
STP Metro is mostly for capital purchases. There's no operations component of that. TAP is mostly for bicycle programs, bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, and CMAQ is CMAQ we have used in the past for establishing new routes, but the direction that we're getting is that CMAQ is going away. So there's really no funding sources that we would use for operations.
Okay, makes sense. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you. I can sit down now?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
all
Thank
right,
you.
Thanks.
All right, Ken, you're back in the hot seat.
So I think, the major difference is that should a bad project get a 0 point, or should it get negative points? We started with negative. We've discussed the issues that Kevin has raised and that you've mentioned. TAC to be consistent within individual goals across the modes said, let's have the worst project have a 0 score. It's still the lowest score that you can get in that category, as compared to having a negative score. But that's an option that you could, if you feel strongly about having the negative scores in there, that could be the committee's recommendation.
Just a quick question. From the staff point of view, since you are the ones that have to work with this tool, do you think this will provide enough differentiation when you're scoring projects, as opposed to having the tool expand to include negative scores?
Yes, for just the couple of
Zero
criteria.
will help.
For the couple of criteria that we're talking about, we'll still have adequate separation.
Okay, okay.
Jennifer?
Maybe slightly disagree, but my thinking would be if a transit project indeed does not have a negative impact, that it's fine for it not to have negative scores, whereas if there is the potential for, for example, a roadway project to negatively impact a non-motorized project, I personally feel it should have the opportunity to receive that negative score, even if there isn't consistency underneath each goal. We could have not nested all of the scoring criteria under the goals. That's kind of the format we've been following with this flow chart and the branches and everything. But we could have just completely divorced them and or lumped all the transit things together. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you could set it up so we wouldn't have this issue of consistency underneath a goal. If that makes sense.
Well, I think one thing that's important, and I think Tim's related to it in his comments, and that is there are, regardless of the way I think we are beginning to interpret what's been said here, a transit project or a road project is still also going to have to be looked at from a safety point of view, and there are negative impacts recognized and acknowledged in there. But those come to us, I believe, from the state, right? That's the way it was set up in the spreadsheet, that the safety standards and the scoring criteria would come to us from the state. They would not originate with us.
Well, we have adopted the CDOT, the state safety target, from a legal point of view to meet the federal law.
Okay.
For safety, what you see here, this level of service 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, I don't have something to show you here, but if you can imagine a graph with 4 curved lines going out across this graph. Level of service 1, well, the middle of those 4 lines is average. We're using a software program called Vision Suite Zero that CDOT uses. It's becoming more popular nationwide in analyzing crashes. It compares, for us, we're using the Colorado version, so it compares roads within Colorado, a 4-lane divided major arterial compared in Colorado, not with Kentucky roads or New Mexico roads, just in Colorado. Level of service 1 is well below the average expected number of accidents. Level of service 2 goes up to the average expected number of accidents. Level of service 3 is above average. Level of service 4 is even higher. So in our concept, yes, you can have accidents that are below the average. They might be death, they might be injury, most of them are property. But our emphasis was to go after locations with the highest, the above average number of accidents. And we're only focused on injury and death, not the bumper, the property damage only. That's consistent with the federal emphasis is only on deaths and injuries. So the level of service that identifies the location, above or below average accident history at that intersection or along that road. Then, depending on what is being proposed, there are federal standards, and that's what we will use. It says that if you put in left turn bay, you will reduce accidents by X% based on average historical measurements. If you put in signals instead of a stop sign, if you eliminate U-turns, if you do all of these kind of things, you will reduce accidents. Now, If you take a collector and improve it to minor or our major arterial standards, you will increase deaths and injuries. It sounds counterintuitive that you take a small road and you improve it, widen it, but with that improvement goes higher speeds, and at higher speeds you get more deaths and injuries. So it sounds like a wonderful thing. We need this for mobility. Let's make it an arterial, increase the speeds, we improve mobility. Now we got 4 lanes instead of 2. Wonderful for mobility. You're going to not score very well on safety for deaths and injuries. You probably eliminated a whole lot of property damage only, fender benders and things like that. So there is trade-off. There are competing goals, and not everything is 100% perfect. So there are pros and cons on any single project. So yes, we are using the federal crash reduction factors, and there are some also for pedestrians, that if you do this, this is the impact on pedestrian fatalities and injuries. So that's a separate document that FHWA puts out from car reduction factors.
Okay, Ken, can we move along, please?
Tamara's got her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tamara.
Sorry. I don't think I'm smart enough to be able to understand and figure this out, but I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Kind of an example you gave. I'm going to use, let's say, Academy Boulevard as an example, where we have a lot of traffic and congestion on that, so you want to widen it. You also want to provide longer turning bays so that it's safer. So people making left turn lanes and the site doesn't. One of the issues on that would be there's a lot of bus stops on Academy. So one option is to reduce the number of stops so that we can use that lane as a turning lane, or widen the road so you have additional lanes for more mobility. So like what you're talking about, no project is in a vacuum, but like Ken said, it's a trade-off. What I felt like TAC was saying is, so Academy project as an example, we really need the mobility. It's congested all the time. So it gets a score, let's say 10, I don't know the score. And then, but then, one of the solutions is to reduce some of the transit stop locations. Then suddenly we're getting a -1, let's say. It also, chances are it's going to increase the speed on Academy Boulevard. So then now you've made the non-motorized portion of it less beneficial. Less people are going to want to ride their bikes on Academy. So now we got another negative. So you have an Academy project that really needs this, but now you suddenly have all these other factors are basically at the sacrifice of the mobility aspect of it. And I feel like I said, I don't understand and maybe the weighting system will factor into it, and that makes a huge difference. So maybe it's a joint conversation on that. But the way the things are presented to me, I have a hard time wrapping my head around removing a few bus stops and people driving faster on Academy because we've just now made it a little bit more accessible by widening it, or making it easier to speed on it. I feel like now Academy, that project's going to score low, so then it may not make the cut to be funded during that period. That's my biggest concern, because I do agree with what you guys are saying, that we do need to factor in the negative impact. But at what cost, I think, is my question. And if the way you guys weight it, or this magical spreadsheet that you guys have, that can factor all that in, and we're not then basically doing all this exercise and then at the end saying, Academy, we really need to widen it, but it didn't score as high as this other road. Do you see what I mean? And then it just becomes all qualitative again. When we're trying to take things that are qualitative and we're trying to quantify it. And so that's the difficulty I'm wrapping my head around, putting numbers to things. So sometimes it's almost like you have to make it, okay, these are parameters, these are what we're working with, and the best we can do is within this, the tools we have. I don't know if anyone else is struggling understanding it, but I am.
Aubrey first, please.
Yeah, just in response to that, in my mind, what you just described is a perfect reason why we need the negative scoring criteria, because you're talking about improving mobility only for automobiles. you're talking about decreasing mobility for transit and non-motorized. And that's where it gets tricky. So if it does cancel out, then it is a low-scoring project because we need to be considering mobility for all modes. And they have done a good, well, we will have done a good job if we include a counterbalance in there to factor for that.
Right, so then does Academy never gets, you see what I'm saying? What happens Academy if this never gets worked on?
I think it's important to also consider that there are other ways to mitigate congestion than by adding additional lanes.
Jen?
The thing that concerns me here is I think we're getting a little bit in the weeds. And I'm not sure that that's our role to be this deep in the weeds. One of the things I've noticed when we've done this scoring over the last 5.5 years is that the bottom line is when we start looking at projects that we all have some general knowledge about, and we have knowledge from the staff and a little bit more added by the TAC and that kind of stuff, is we get down to cost benefit. When we get down to cost benefit, they always have my attention. And because I weigh it with what I know, with the amount of people that are impacted by it, how people are impacted by it, and then, you know, when I'm looking at the changes that had to do just making positive numbers, you're still just doing positive. I mean, 0 is low, 9 is high. You know, you're still weighting those things against it. So I guess if the people that are probably a little closer to the technical part of weighting these and measuring these feel that this is a good idea, I'm okay with it, because frankly, when I get to the bottom line and I look at these projects all being weighted against each other, I'm going to be looking strongly at cost benefit. How many people benefit? How does it change, or how does it improve, you know, what the communities face with that kind of stuff? So, you know, right now, if the people that are, and I won't say in the weeds is a bad thing, it's a good thing, and I'm grateful they do it, because I'm not in the weeds with this stuff. I'm okay if you all think that this is a good way to go. I can support that. I had one other question that's totally unrelated to this that had to do with no baseline data at all.
On which one?
Until 2021, which means that how do you weight anything if you don't have any baseline data? Or how do you?
Well, that's one that we did not have a criteria based on, because there is no data.
And out there.
That next 4 years from now, maybe we'll have some data.
Okay, I can, as far as depending on how the weighting goes and how it shakes out, if there's something that really sticks out because of not having that negativity, you know, the negative numbers on it, we'll see that. I don't think it'll be that. Every time we've looked at these projects before, it's obvious if some calculation made it skewed in some way, and then people with a little bit of common sense and thinking about what the community's facing, speaking about this cannot be right. So, and we've made those changes on the end. So, I'm okay to live with what the
Hal,
staff
and then I think
have.
we need to let Ken wrap up so that we can move forward, please.
My comment would be that taking out the negatives does not penalize sufficiently those projects that don't meet the overall goals. The goals are set up as positives, whether it's a reduction of this, an increase in that, something. Having a 0 as a no change, if you're heavily impacting ridership for some reason or mobility other, I think they ought to be penalized more than just getting a 0. Because the goal is to improve, not to have any sort of a reduction. If there is a reduction and you're not improving, you're getting worse, you should be penalized for it more than just getting a 0 score. That would be my opinion. It's kind of to your point tomorrow, but looking at it a little bit different.
All right, Ken, do you have anything else to share?
No,
Okay.
I think you have identified the same issue staff did and the same issue TAC did is,
All right.
you know,
Fabulous. That leaves us with a motion we need. Anybody want to try?
So, question, are we, the staff, are you guys asking us to recommend what's here, even with the red text and all that, or is this for our information? I need a little bit more direction on what you guys are asking us to recommend.
So my understanding is we've got a recommendation from staff. We have the red numbers are the recommendation from TAC.
Okay.
We can recommend one or the other or a whole new shebang if we'd like.
Staff has not officially, and we always try not to officially adopt a position until we have heard from both committees. Now, we were involved in what TAC developed. I refused to commit myself or staff at that point. But I could live with what they developed, and I could live with if we go back to negative scores.
So the first all-black sheet was the original
That was the
recommendation.
original.
Okay, that we got mailed to us. The red ones then TAC revised. We can pick one or pick our own.
I only have the red revised because I printed the latest document.
I only had the black.
Yes, Julie.
So if we approved what staff recommended, would that include just the one under mobility, it is mobility, I think now, that you would consider the one category? Or would you be considering what has been discussed here, I think, by Aubrey, especially and Tamara, and Kevin, the different possibilities that something can affect another? Would you consider each one?
I think in mobility, it was not a single score, was it?
That has not been clearly defined in my opinion, but one thing I do want to point out is that, so we didn't go through all of the goals here, and I feel like there were some, can't think of the right word, but pretty solid changes made by TAC. We've focused on this where there's a disagreement, but if you were to recommend what was in your original packet, there are other things that are worth considering that, again, haven't been discussed today, just to point out.
Yes, please.
This is Jim Moore. I'm going to move that we adopt the original proposal with the one amendment from the TAC to delete headways as a scoring criterion under Goal 3.
Is there a second? Thank you. All right.
Names real quick?
That was Jim Moore made the motion and Hal
Hal
Moffitt
Moffitt.
second. Okay.
That means approving the red.
No, the black.
No, it means approving the black that came out.
We're on the black. We're on the New Zealand. This is the New
With
Zealand
one
recommendation.
amendment.
With
The
one
all
amendment to remove the headways from the mobility goal. Yes.
Just a
discussion.
clarification then, Goal 3, B, where it says population served within a quarter mile. If we look at the negative numbers, the negatives, I believe, are switched between -9 and -3, because if we're going to reduce population served within a quarter mile of transit stops by 30%, that's going to be a -9, I think, instead of reducing it by 10%.
You're correct. That should be flipped.
Yes. So just, if we can keep that in mind, that would presumably be the correction for a vote.
Is that a friendly amendment?
Sure.
Do you accept the friendly amendment?
Hold on. We got another voice in county is heard from.
What about this right here?
That was a big one.
I just wanted to point out that removing headways, that's part of Goal 3, connectivity and accessibility, not mobility.
Oh.
I said Goal 3. I
I
said Goal
thought
3.
I heard
didn't say
mobility.
which one.
Okay, all right.
I
Okay.
think. If I said mobility, I apologize, but I just thought I said Goal 3.
I think you said mobility.
Okay, so I'm sorry, now I'm confused. Where are we? What were you talking about?
That was 3B
3B.
3B?
In the original.
in the original.
It should just be reversed.
30% reduction is worse than
Oh, okay.
than a 10% reduction.
Well, no, wait.
It's, yeah, 3B on the original.
Copy and paste that didn't flip.
Good catch, Julie.
It should go
Yeah.
30, 20, 10.
Okay.
Ken, can I ask
That
a
should be
quick
30.
question?
So, okay. I will accept that amendment, and we can figure out what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
You okay with the second on the amended motion?
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay. Jen?
I'd like to, mostly because we didn't address it, under economic vitality, it says zero, no impact, and I was just curious as to what Ken and Jennifer felt about where it says including mitigated. It's under economic vitality, under the scoring piece. And what's the impact? That's the wrong wording. They're using impact here.
Point of order? That's not directly on the motion.
I know, I was going to make an amendment,
Oh.
because I didn't know if you were going to make it to any discussion. And that was one of the changes that was recommended, other than the negatives.
Was to remove the including mitigated? Or?
No, it's included.
To put it, including
That's what
mitigated.
that's the one they're talking.
Because I hadn't heard staff say anything about how that
Move it.
impacts this scoring.
I didn't print the revised version, so I'm,
Well, I didn't either, I just got it from Jessica,
So am I.
stole her copy.
Well, in the scoring you got in your packet, under Goal 5, Economic Vitality for Environment, we have a negative, including mitigated impacts. Now, in the NEPA process, when you go out and you do a project and you plan for it and you do the environmental work, there are environmental impacts. Under the law, you can mitigate, which is minimize or counteract.
Yep.
You damage some land, you can replace some land. So we at staff had said, if you go out and you remove 5 acres of a wetland and then build another isolated 5 acres someplace else, you have mitigated that impact. It's legal, but you have still impacted that wetland size, the range of whatever species were in there. There are impacts from a purely theoretical environmental point of view. So that's why we said, even if you have mitigated impacts from a legal sense, they should still be there. It was pointed out that the approved target allows or addresses the word mitigation.
Okay.
So we moved, if you have mitigated impacts and that's legal, then that can go, instead of a negative score, would be a 0 score.
Okay.
So you would agree positively that including mitigated is a good thing?
To move it to 0 from -3.
Yeah,
Yes, that's my understanding.
that's correct.
Okay. So did you want to make an amendment, Jen?
I just wanted to, if the staff felt like that was an improvement that is worth considering, since we didn't make it to Goal 5, that we ought to have that in there. as
Well,
an
everybody
amendment.
should have had an opportunity to review all this before they came in, so that's why I didn't feel we needed to continue having Ken, go through stuff that we should have already taken a look at. So do you want to make an amendment to move, because Jim's motion includes it as written in black, not the red version that we see on the
Right.
screen. So do you want to make an amendment to his motion to make the changes under Goal 5 to move including mitigated to 0?
Yes.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Do you accept?
Yeah, I'm fine with
Yes.
that.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Kevin, you had your hand up?
That's what I was going to, that's the exact issue that I was going to talk about.
Okay, excellent. Aubrey?
This gentleman, should we give
Oh,
him a
I'm
chance
so
first,
sorry.
or?
No problem. And sir, ladies and gentlemen, you're going through the exact same challenges and noggin scratching that we went through. But I would have one I would like to share with you and point out that's a little bit different than what the staff originally projected or proposed, had in their side proposal. And Jennifer did a great job of I think, laying that earlier. And that was, actually goes back to the first goal of maintenance under bridge. So this is the maintenance goal. And if you look in your original package, it said you had 0 points if your bridge sufficiency was from 50 to 100. And then your points went on from there, 60, 70, 80, 90, and the like. The reason we thought through this and actually broke it out into the tens for each individual point was particularly for some of the smaller communities who, if they were going to do like a bridge deck replacement, not replace the entire bridge, but they wanted to get some points for a small maintenance project. So the bridge would still be sufficient. It would still be a 60 to 69, say, but you need to do a maintenance work on it. You could actually get points for that because this is a maintenance goal. So with that, I would ask you to consider that as you look through this. There are others goals like this where we broke out a little bit more granularity for each individual point. And that's how we looked at them, because we thought it was either beneficial or more accurately reflected what we were trying to score and what we were trying to achieve in each of the goals.
I don't afraid of being an example.
Yes, sir. There are several of those in there, so I appreciate that people need to look at them and read ahead. I would just encourage you to look at the breakouts that we have. Sometimes we remove the negatives, try to be fair, and that was always tough. Sometimes we just added more granularity between points. I would ask you to consider that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on a second, Jennifer. Tamara?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a friendly amendment specifically for the bridge that the gentleman spoke of, because the staff recommendation where basically they're saying 50 to 100, you get 0 points. When you have a bridge sufficiency of 50, that is not a passing grade for a bridge.
Right.
And so I really appreciate that you guys broke it out, because, yeah, when you do a bridge sufficiency, you take different components of the bridge and you rate them, and then you might have to have an overall score. So what the gentleman said is perfectly true. So I would request a friendly amendment to adopting what TAC recommended for at least the bridge.
So I'm going to interject a little bit here for some thought. Since I think the biggest area we disagreed with removing the negatives or any of the changes that TAC made is goal 2, that we, rather than making 6 different friendly amendments to adopting the black version, maybe we start with the TAC and just replace it with goal 2 as originally provided in the packet. I'm not the author of the motion, so just some thought, because it sounds to me like that's really where we had the heartburn with removing the negatives from the scoring criteria. So if somebody has a better idea, I'd love to hear it. And Jennifer?
That was also my suggestion, because we have a lot of friendly amendments piling up at this point.
Yeah. So, Jim, over to you.
Well, I'm looking at my second. May I withdraw my amendment?
Absolutely. I'm on board. I think that's a great solution.
Okay.
So what she said.
Withdraw your amendment.
All right, I've withdrawn my amendment, and
Okay.
the seconder has
Try your
withdrawn his.
motion.
But I'm still going to now I'm going to try this again. We move adoption of the proposed criteria as presented through the TAC, with the exception of goal 2, which we would recommend adoption of the draft from staff.
Second.
All right. Yes, Aubrey, one more piece of discussion.
2 points. With removal of the headway scoring criteria, it gets a little tricky because we still have an objective around headways. And even though I guess there's no, it would be a rare case where there would be a project that would go through PPACG that would increase headways. So either we need to take out that objective, or we need to leave in the scoring criteria in case something did come up that had the potential to affect headways.
There are several objectives that do not have a criteria at this point specifically for them. So this would just fall into that category.
I don't know that it's imperative that we have the specific measure for that area.
Okay.
But, I mean, obviously, if you have an objection, so,
Brian, do you have any comment on that?
I agree with what Ken said.
Okay.
That's consistent. We don't have criteria for all objectives.
Okay.
That's fair.
Okay, I'll defer to you guys on that then. Okay, then I would like to make the friendly recommendation that we also consider under goal number 2 that projects are scored across modes.
I'll tell you what, I'm not going to accept that because that's a procedure as opposed to a target or criterion.
okay. Any other discussions?
Would I just, can I recommend that after, just as a point of how that rolls out?
Well, I think the brains have been present to hear that, and I would agree with that. I think we've had a further discussion about that. I mean, it's just my opinion.
Kevin?
Yeah, could you scroll down to the economic vitality thing that we can make sure that Jen's, okay, that was corrected in the red. Okay, good. That's all I
Yeah,
needed.
that's why we adopted the TAC and modified.
I just
from
wanted to
there.
make sure.
So-
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor of the amendment as amended?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Is there a way, how
God, I
would
have
we
to
make
take a
a
nap.
recommendation to the board that they consider scoring projects? Or in the, or note to the board? Okay, all right.
Just the TAC would like to make sure that goal 2 is measured.
Across all of them? Okay.
Do we need to vote on that? Is there
No,
agreement on
it's
that?
just part of the notes. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
As a rep from ONCAP, to the TAC representatives as well as staff for clarifying the muddy water and helping us get to consensus for this one. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thanks, Ellen. Okay. I think we've killed that item. Up next is Jennifer Valentine, small area forecast.
Yeah, I didn't have to take a single note, so that was great. Jennifer Valentine, I'm a transportation planner with PPACG. So I think it's been maybe 2 or 3 months since I last gave an update on small area forecast activities. We have had quite a bit going on, so I just wanted to come back and tell you where we are, and especially where we are in terms of the schedule. So I'm happy to report that we are on schedule based on what was presented here. So that kind of step 1 through 8 outlines different timeframes for our activities. So as you see here, we did spend the latter part of 2017, really well before then, but that's when we were kind of wrapping up, really testing the model, having UrbanSim, the company that we're working with, finish building the model and tweaking the user interface, things like that. Our goal was sort of maybe the last week of January or early February to start taking some draft results to our member governments. So we've been doing things a little bit differently this plan cycle. Previous plan cycles, there was what we called a small area forecast task force, and it was kind of like a combined, condensed version of the TAC and the CAC and some land use planners. So this time we've just been working directly with land use planners from our member governments because we felt they really know what's going on the ground in their communities. So we have been encouraging sort of informal involvement by TAC members. So to use, I'll pick on El Paso County, for example. So I've been working with Ramir, who's one of their land use planners, on development projects and zoning and things like that. But Victoria and Anton, who are our El Paso County TAC members, are certainly welcome to attend any of those meetings or to see early drafts. It's not going to be for another month or two that we start bringing those draft results to the TAC and the CAC because there's just a lot of things to troubleshoot. There's, we didn't originally give you this development project or something going on with zoning, and we need to get through that before we start bringing it to our committees. So really the first week of February, we did have one-on-one meetings with most of our member governments, land use staff. A couple people were just still playing phone tag with or getting remote types of input. But we got really, really good feedback. We do have some additional development projects to enter in the model to help make it more realistic and more representative of what's actually in the pipeline right now. So we're going to spend maybe 1 or 2 more weeks tweaking things there. There's a lot of information to put in, but so far the model results are looking really, really good. And so then the next step is sharing those tweaked results, the next draft, with a small team of regional economic experts. So we have a couple people from Summit Group. I think we're still working on somebody from HBA who's going to provide some oversight. And at that point, we will also share some of the draft results with this committee and with the TAC. And our very last step will be, we have an iterative process with our travel model that takes quite a bit of time to do each run. And so we'll integrate those travel model skims. So that's pretty much our plan. Like I said, we're basically on schedule right now. And actually one point to clarify, the only thing we did do was build in a couple of extra months here at the end because we didn't want to be too optimistic about getting the small area forecast through our committees and our board in 1 or 2 months or anything like that. So we built in a little bit of extra review time, and we're showing the results to you all and to the TAC a little bit earlier. So delays in other areas, namely the scoring criteria, benefited us here because we had extra time to share with you all.
Okay. Questions? Anybody have any questions for Jen? Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
All right, Jessica. Tell us about the legislature.
I'm sorry. Standing's too tall. So, as you guys all received in your packets, which didn't change, the PPACG Board of Directors actually took a position at our February 14th meeting to monitor the following bills. Senate Bill 1, which was the Transportation Infrastructure Funding Bill. Senate Bill 2, Financing Rural Broadband. House Bill 1119, which did die. House Bill 1178, we have on our list purely as for your information to our governments. It's listed as a monitor in our positions, but we just wanted them to know that there's a bill going on about sanctuary jurisdictions. 1191 is about local governments altering speed limits. Again, that was an FYI. And Senate Bill 15 is to protect homeowners and deployed military from squatters. It was another FYI for our members. And then the other one that we are also tracking right now is Senate Bill 104, which is another rural broadband. So many of PPACG's members are rural. There are no other bills currently on our list. We're anticipating another transportation bill sometime relatively soon, but we'll see what that looks like because there are negotiations going on now. Have any other questions from legislative?
Jen?
Jessica, is it standard that PPACG doesn't take a role or take a position on anything that's not specific to transportation?
What we do is we actually monitor bills that will have any impact on any of PPACG's programs, and we review them through those program managers. So there have been several bills that might impact Area Agency on Aging, for example. And so what we would do is the lobbyist and I would look those over with that manager. So Joe Urban for AAA, and we'd go, will this impact your program? Looks like it will. And after review, he'd say, no. If it doesn't impact one of our programs, we don't take a position on it. We review anything that might impact any of our programs.
So it's programs, not people. I guess, and the reason I'm raising this is because Senate Bill 18-015, the part about protecting homeowners and deployed military, I just don't get why you wouldn't take a position on that because of the influence of housing and people owning homes.
Because it doesn't have a direct impact on any of PPACG's programs. It does relate to our members, which is why we made sure they were aware of it. But PPACG has nothing to do with housing, with squatters' rights, with any of that. Those are not programs we are currently involved in. So that's why.
Anybody else have any questions for Jessica? All right. Thank you, Jessica. Moving along. Ken, your turn again.
Haven't you had enough of
He
me?
hasn't even healed from it.
I know.
All right, Ken Prather, PPACG Acting Transportation Director. Now that we have somewhat of a common set of criteria that we hope that the board will approve, at its next meeting, at your next meeting, you're going to be asked to weight the criteria. Now, in the past, as I said earlier, we had one target, or we had one goal, one objective, target, and we wound up with one criteria. You weighted the criteria. The fact that it was tied to one goal was true, but it wasn't, that was not necessarily what was being weighted. It was the criteria. We're going to ask you to weight the criteria that the board approves at your next meeting, and I'll show you the methodology or the process of how that occurs. But what you will need to decide is, we have some goals here now that only have one target and one criteria. Some goals have multiple objectives and targets and criteria. So can you weight a goal that only has one compared to a goal that has three targets and criteria? Is that what you want to do, or do you just want to stick with the criteria and weight the criteria? And I'll show you here quickly how you normally do this, but at this point, it's your personal opinion. Is safety more important than infill? Is mobility more important than maintenance? And you're going to rate it. You know, it's kind of what's your personal opinion. You, for PPACG, you represent the citizens and the public perspective.
So Ken, forgive me. Ken, you're talking about weighting the goals or weighting?
Well, I would recommend weighting the criteria.
Okay, that's, okay.
And that's why we're waiting. That's why we've been waiting for the board to approve the criteria, because they approved the goals long time ago. That's not what I wanted. What happened to my? I'm sorry, I opened the wrong document. Or I put the wrong document up there. No, there it is.
I'm confused, I'm sorry.
There it is.
We've got major goals, maintenance and operation, and then we've got 4 targets underneath that. Which of those is the one that you are asking and we need to consider for?
I would ask for criteria, but that's your call as the.
What's the criteria?
The scoring criteria that you just recommended approved.
The horse we just killed.
Item 4B.
We're back to the dead horse.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, let's say under mobility, there's an auto and freight section. We would prioritize auto and freight, transit, and non-motorized in some fashion. Those are the criteria?
Yeah, we had, you recommended each one of those be a scoring criteria. So there would be, you're going to wind up, I think it is now, it's 8 criteria, 9 criteria, because we got rid of the one transit one. So I think it's 8 criteria.
So if I can clarify, within each goal, what you're saying is we should consider having a criteria for each of the criteria, not each of the scoring areas underneath it, but the top level item.
Well, that's your decision. My recommendation would be you use the scoring criteria that you just recommended for approval. But if you want to do something else, you can, but it becomes complicated because the goals are not equally sized, and so if you weight one goal, then you're weighting three criteria underneath it.
Under each goal, sure.
So let me show you how it was done for the 2040 plan, for a few of you that remember this. We can ignore the goals, but this was the evaluation criteria. There were 13 of them. This is just a simple description. And now this spreadsheet was emailed out to the CAC members a couple weeks before. I'll email it out as soon as the board approves it. And you're asked to rank or prioritize the scoring criteria, that's what was here, two different ways. One is you've got 100 points, $100. How much would you put on each of those criteria? From 1 to 100. You got to put at least one. So you could have, if we're going to have 9 criteria, you could put $91 on one and one on all the others, or you could do it 20-20 and 5-5-5-5, or whatever. The more you think a criteria is important to you, to the community, put more points on it. So that's what you would fill in here. This one is, again, what's your most important criteria? This will say 9 or 8 to 1, whatever is our final number of criteria. So the most important to you would get 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. You just rank them down to 1. Now, under using this weighting parameter, you could have multiple criteria with the same weight. You could have 3 of them with 15 points each, and then the remaining points scattered amongst the others. But obviously, if you come to ranking, you can only use the numbers once. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's a slightly different way of just expressing your priority for those 9 criteria, or whatever the board winds up approving.
John?
We spent an hour and a half approving criteria. You think we're really going to get a consensus of opinion of all of us?
Not-
How the heck we're going to weight this?
Not today.
Now, this is informational today, just so we know it's coming.
This is, you got a month to think about it.
You've given us some options to muddy it up real well by putting different kinds of weights within it, or simply ranking 1 through 9 what they should be. What would you like?
I'm asking you to do both.
Okay.
Fill out both of these columns when we send this to you. You can't put more than a total of 100 points in this one, and you have to use all of the numbers only once in this column.
Right.
We will email that to you.
Back to you, so it's all prepared for our next meeting.
Right. You email it back to us.
So that we name it,
Now, if somebody doesn't email it back to us, the way it looks is we will take your email and just copy and paste into this spreadsheet. So the gray, white, these were different people on the CAC 4 years ago. So these are their rankings, these are their weightings, and you see that they all add up to 100 points under the weighting. And at that time we had 13, so 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, all that adds up to 91. So this was the input from the CAC members. Now, this is what we will have at the next meeting. We hope 90% at least filled out. So if somebody comes, it's real quick to add their score. During the meeting, if you see that your numbers are significantly different than everybody else, you can have the option to convince them that they should change theirs. And realize that they might try to convince you to change yours, but that option can be done. This is just enter the number there, because over to the right, it's all summed. So here's the sum of all these weight columns. Here's the sum of the ranks. These 2 columns convert it from these large numbers down to a scale of 100 for each columns. This one averages these first 2 columns, and this is the final weighting that you recommended to the board. And so in this case, I can't read it. Here's cost effectiveness. That got a weighting of 9.3. So when we score a project using the criteria that we just looked at, maybe it had a score of, well, perfect score, nine criteria, nine, so say it was 81. The weighting is 9.2. So 81 points times 9.2 significantly increases that score, and that becomes the weighted score that is used in the final ranking and prioritization of the projects. And so then we will take the weighted score, put that, develop that for the 200, 300 projects we get. And so here's our highest ranked projects down to our lowest ranked projects, scored projects, I'm sorry. And then we go through how much money do we have? Where's the cutoff line? Oh, well, here's the cutoff line, but I got my project just below the cutoff line. It's really got to be done. And that's where the professional planner expertise comes in and can override these absolute numbers and stuff. We're not automatons. So that's where the community involvement can get in and say, hey, I don't care how poorly Academy scored. We need it in the next 20 years because the plan is a 20-year document. There's no guarantee that if it gets in the plan that we're going to do it tomorrow. Sometime in the next 20 years, maybe, because in 4 years, we're going to replace the plan and start over. But our TIP projects that we are going to do in the next 4 years, they must come from the plan. So it's important that the projects, the right projects, get into the plan, even though it's a 20-year document. So that's kind of the process. I just need your opinion, and I guess the discussion for you today amongst yourselves is, do you want to only address and score the criteria? Do you want to only score the 5 goals and somehow express a sub-weighting for the one goal that only has 1 criteria and the other goal that has 3 or 4 criteria? And how do you make that mathematical split and stuff? That's why I think it's simpler just to weight the criteria that the board approves.
Aubrey?
Yeah, 2 quick things. So I would recommend that we weight the criteria, and in consideration of weighting it, we think about how many criteria are within each goal. So we factor that in as we're going through this exercise. And I just wonder if anybody who went through this in the previous round has any comment on how they felt the process went.
Go ahead, Jen.
There's how it comes out. And then, like I said, you add an element of logic, and you've got to be kidding stuff to it. And then sometimes there's a little bit of what I warmly would call, but I hate the word, gerrymandering, to make sure that it's consistent with what we feel like we could support as a group. And it's usually minor, as far as moving one up or down based on funding. But it is definitely a way to move the process forward and to get everybody's opinion and make it a group thing.
Jim?
I can, in response to your question, Aubrey, I'll tell you how I'm going to do it. You can take it or leave it. I'm going to do the ranking first, and I'm going to use the forced pair. Have you ever used a forced pair comparison? You take each goal or each criterion and match it up against every other criterion. And you say, this one's better than that one. And you do that for each one, and then you do it all the way down the line. And at the end of it, you will have an order of how many got the priority vote. So you give them one, you give them 1 mark or something. And so you do, for example, on the list, you start with maintenance. You do maintenance versus mobility, maintenance versus connectivity, and so on. And then you'd start with mobility. You don't have to, you've already done maintenance with them, so you do the same thing. And that will give you some order of scoring that will flow into the ranking. Then it's very subjective. But the thing, and this is to Jen's point, this is an attempt to bring great precision to a very vague kind of process. So, good luck, everybody.
So I've been through this twice. This will be my third time. The first time was extremely overwhelming because the amount of criteria, and there were only 13. I think there were 14 or 15 the first time we did it when I was here.
17.
Was it 17? All right. Anyway. But I do think it's probably easiest to do the ranking first, decide what is relatively more important than the others from your and your community's perspective, and then try and assign a weight to it based on that. But that's just kind of my 2 cents, having been through it a couple times. Tamara?
I'm impressed, Ken, that you guys put together that nice little spreadsheet because it looks so easy because it was not easy. I think today's conversation was difficult. The past experiences we spent, I felt like months and months. So I think
We had special scoring criteria work sessions for 2 hours.
It was very, very convoluted, but I think it seems like we keep getting better and better, which is exciting. That the process is getting better and better. What I also noticed on that, we never saw the final outcome, Ken, but I just quick glance, there was a lot of consistency between all the members if you saw, so nothing seemed way off the whack, I guess. So, but I would agree with everyone's comment that I did the 1 through 10 or whatever the ranking, and then I thought, just like Ken said, how much do I want to spend? How important is this? And just providing basically $100 I get to spend on these criteria and what I want, the value I found in each one of those criteria. And I'll say I didn't do as much of a logical process. I went more with what my community around me values, and obviously my value factors into that. And so for me, it was more of a gut thing and less than a logical process.
Does anybody else? Hal?
Is this going to be a specific topic at our next meeting? In other words, we're supposed to come up with a, quote, finalized table?
Yes.
Yes.
It sounds like there's a certain level of maybe discomfort, might not be the right word, but kind of not being sure how to do this or what the process is. Is there any value in having another training session, so-called, to at least explain it a little more? Because I can see where if you get a package of paper that's words on this is how you do it, it's going to be difficult to understand. Like, as you said, the first time through, I've done a lot of these in business. That's the only reason I'm comfortable with it. First time through was pulling teeth. It's very difficult. Is there value in having a training session?
I would suggest that we have a tutorial that attached with the sheet, not just the blank sheet that comes out to explain how or what it's doing, rather than have a whole separate meeting or training session on it. Just some kind of tutorial about, like you explained.
We will I'll certainly include a memo and a description of what you're being asked to do,
Right.
but basically what you will get is that other
And more importantly, Ken's phone
Spreadsheet.
number is going to be attached to this, so we can call him.
His home address, his phone number.
But yes, there was a workshop the last time.
Times that we
There
did
was
it.
a workshop just before the normal 3 o'clock CAC meeting.
Yeah, we can have one.
It's been done a couple of ways in the past where TAC also provided weighting. We did one time where the public directly provided weighting. Most of the time, it's been CAC only, and this time it is CAC only. The TAC is not
Oh, they're not gonna
making
wait
a
this
weighting. It is your weighting that will go to the board.
All right, so what is the general consensus? Do people want to have a special session an hour or two ahead of time to go through this? Are we good with the email process?
How much time do we
Speak
have on
up.
the agenda for this?
We don't know yet.
The agenda's not.
Yeah, we have no idea what the agenda is next month yet.
We'll be keeping it light since we expect the
Yep.
discussion to go on.
We'll turn into a retreat. My concern is if we're going to have a chance to get the data then collected and back and available to us, whether it can be done in the time frame we're talking about.
Is there value maybe in us having Ken mail it out everybody submit their information, and then kind of we hash out the final numbers at the meeting next month, and then that'll give everybody an opportunity to.
Yep.
How does everybody feel about that? Yes, no, this sucks. All right. Yes, ma'am.
I would vote for that. If anything, you don't want to come in here not having done your homework, because then you are out of the loop. You know, when you're trying to hear rational discussion from your peers, if you haven't done it. So I think that's a great idea if we can get it ahead of time, Kent, and then spend some days. I'm not sure what your turnaround time is on that. And spend some days doing it and then resubmitting it back to you, so you at least have initial. You know, I could be convinced by somebody else's, more strength of knowledge on a project and background, so, but.
So when were you looking to have this out to us? What was your
I think,
initial thought?
I'm trying to remember now, the criteria that you just recommended are the same criteria as the TAC. There was a difference on the scoring. But
correct.
the individual 9 or 8 scoring criteria were the same.
That's correct.
We could send something out next week
Okay.
based on those, realizing their draft criteria, and the board might monkey around with them. But we could send that out next week with a write-up of here's the spreadsheet, fill out your opinion, here's how to rank it, the most important gets 13 or 9, and the least important gets 1. And that type of thing. You could respond to whatever you think is an appropriate time for you. And then it's real easy to put them all together and then turn around and email it back to you.
The board's going to be voting on this on the 14th?
Right.
Okay.
14th of
March. So 2 weeks from today.
But if you're willing to work with draft criteria, we could mail that out to you tomorrow.
Or does
Next
everybody want to wait until the board actually approves the criteria and then they mail it out to us on the 15th rather than, just in case, the board?
Imagine the board's only going to add one or delete one.
So, however.
Shall we wait till after the board?
Right. That's what I'm suggesting, is that have staff send it to us on the 15th, since the board, or even the afternoon of the 14th, once the board's approved the final criteria. And that still gives us 2 weeks before our meeting to play with it, think about it, and get some numbers back to Ken so that he can have kind of a draft look at our combined scores.
And is the plan to have a computer and the spreadsheet available at the meeting that would start with our feedback, and then if individuals wanted to modify their scores, we could go through that process and end up with a draft or perhaps a final approved scoring criteria?
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Is that our goal?
Assuming Ken's willing to support that.
That's perfect. That's what I anticipated, because
Okay.
this is what you would come into the meeting with this all filled out, as long as you replied in the emails. And I didn't participate in the last couple of workshops that you're referencing, so I don't know what it was that you were discussing. If you were trying to convince each other of what should be more important than the others, or was it just the process, or?
It was more the process. All right, is anybody opposed to having the staff send us out the final criteria on which we need to wait on the 14th or 15th, and then getting responses back to Ken no later than Monday, the 26th? Is that 2 days prior?
I know.
No, that only gives them 4 days.
I know.
No.
That's enough time for me
Because
to,
all you're going to have to do is put numbers together.
that's
So I'm
all I got to
guessing
do
as
is
long as-
copy and paste numbers.
That gives everybody 2 weekends, because I know everybody's busy, they've got jobs and lives and everything, so. And then, when we come together on the 28th, we can sit down and, Ken will bring his computer and we can make adjustments if we need to.
So just for clarification then, we're going to get 2 mailings?
One.
We're going
We're
to get
gonna
one
wait
for the
until-
scoring criteria and one for the agenda like we normally get?
Oh, yes.
So we get 2 mailings
Two
from staff?
mailings,
Well,
correct.
and the
This one.
criteria will only come in email.
Email.
Because it won't do you
Okay.
any good to write it out.
Right.
Right, that's what I wanted,
Send
okay.
an email, and if you don't have an email address, please let me know
Okay.
after today's meeting so that we can figure out a way to make it work for you.
Okay. Hearing no violent objections to that process, that's how we'll proceed. Thank you, Ken.
Well, thank you.
I will chime in. If anybody gets it and is confused, please reach back out.
Yeah.
Ken or I are both more than willing to help walk you through it and help. So even if you understood it right now and it goes away in the next 2 weeks, just, I'm here.
I will send a tutorial, with the spreadsheet.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. All right.
Thank you.
Member announcements. One thing that I would like to do, and I apologize for not doing this at the beginning of the meeting, is thank our previous board officers, although 2 of us are still stuck here. But thank Kevin.
Thank yourself.
Thank Kevin for his support this past year. And Jim for taking care of the Board of Directors meetings. As some of you may or may not know, I am in tax season as a tax accountant. So it's a wee bit busy right now. And so Jim has graciously agreed to help out and support the Board of Directors meetings and stuff for the next month or so while I try and survive wonderful tax filing season. So, and if you all have tax questions, I'm not interested. Okay. With that, you're going to take the Board of Directors meeting on March 14th, right?
Yes.
And you're going to make sure that we articulate our concern that Goal 2 is scored across all modes?
Yes.
Awesome. So just to make sure that you understand, I didn't forget or gloss over your concern. All right. Any other member announcements? Yes, ma'am.
Just one comment. I really appreciate the respectful dialogue when people agree or disagree in here, so thank you very much.
Jennifer?
So you've probably already heard about our needs survey, but another reminder, there's postcards, there's some by the food, there's some by the sign-in table. Please, please, please help us spread the word. We're doing, a needs survey, just to get a more qualitative perspective on regional needs to supplement our quantitative data sets. I think as of this morning, we had 312 responses. Our last survey, we got 398. I think if we hit 500, Ken is buying me and Jessica lunch. Awesome. Let's try to get well over 500. If you need postcards, I have a ton more upstairs. Please hand them out. Put them on your front desks, whatever.
Take a stack and I'll give you bonus points if you go for whoever on the committee gets the most responses.
Do we write our initials on that?
Yeah, really? All right. Any other member announcements? Items for the next CAC meeting. Did we get Hyperloop rescheduled?
Tentatively.
Okay. All right.
Because of the scoring criteria, we may sweep them today.
Yeah, please, because I just know a lot of people are interested in Hyperloop, and I don't want to lose the bubble on that. Anything else that, yes, Aubrey?
Tamara, was it you that asked about the HPTE group? Is it possible, I don't know if this is a directive to staff or not, to find out what their recommendation was for the GAP project? Since that was a group that already presented to us, if we could.
We will try to do some research and get back to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else? Next meeting is March 28th. Hope to see you all here.
Just before we go, just to make sure there's a quorum, because that's spring break for several school districts. So just to double check.
Every district in the region.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
At the local
Some
level.
of them have 2-week schedules for that matter. But I know there are some parents here. I just want to make sure we have a quorum if we are meeting on the 28th.
Do we have?
Raise our hands if we're going to be here.
Yeah, or
How
maybe
many
raise your
people
hands
will?
if you can't be, because that's easier to count.
Who's not going to definitely be here? That was really poorly worded. Sorry.
Not
One,
gonna be
two,
here?
three.
Yeah,
And
I'm not
that's-
going to
I'm
be here.
included. I will not be here next month.
Okay, so 5 will.
All right.
Still have a quorum.
Yeah, it looks like we still have a quorum, so thank you, Julie. So for those of you who can't be here for the discussion, especially with regards to the weighting criteria, please, please, please try to respond back to Ken with your inputs. Okay, that's important. All right, anything else? We're adjourned.
While you're leaving, don't stop moving, but while you're leaving, I'm just going to make a service announcement. If you haven't heard, CDOT last week had its servers hacked with ransomware. They have to pay Bitcoin ransom now. That was a week ago last Wednesday, and they are still locked out. So take care of your businesses and your home computers and be careful.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm just waiting for that to happen at doctor's offices, honestly. I don't think we're safe anywhere.
Why, last week I was sitting with friends at the Circle H.
5 o'clock exactly.
I wasn't sure if you were with her or not. Oh, okay. Glad you're doing so well.
You won't be here, but. I know, I am bummed about that. Why? You're relieved deeply and I'm seriously excited about the fact.
As usual, yeah. So, got out of there and then had a baby like right after that in March.
That is my plan, and I do sincerely
And then now Mama's actually for about 6
Oh, I know you.
bakery. Thought I'd try that route. I'm over here.
Yeah, and I would appreciate that very much when that time comes. Yeah. I know.
That's right.
Hey, Jess, are you getting these guys?
You guys left, I think you left like right before.
Did you pick up?
How are you?
Oh, they met other strangers. Did you? Hey, how you doing? Good. I didn't know that. That's so funny. How old is she?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Isn't it crazy to readjust, isn't it? Yeah, pretty wild, but yes.
I know it sucks, doesn't it? That's just like the big life. And by the way, beat me if I don't see you and you want to make a comment. I'm trying to kind of swivel.
Yeah, I know,
around.
yeah. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So,
I appreciate it.
So where are you going then for spring break? Are you going somewhere?
Oh, I figured out when I went back for fall. 2 weeks before tax season.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be a nightmare.
Yeah. Will you be able to? Any sleep is all? That's not it.